My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 72 years old, a widow, and the kind of woman people usually describe as quiet. I used to believe that being quiet meant keeping the peace. That morning, over coffee, I learned it could also mean swallowing a kind of hurt I'd never known before. The Charleston light was soft and gold, slipping through the blinds the way it always did, brushing across the kitchen table where my son, Mark, read the Post and Courier. His wife, Vanessa, sat opposite me, stirring cream into her cup as if nothing in the world could disturb her calm. Lily, my granddaughter, had already left for class, so the house was unusually still. Vanessa looked up suddenly, her lipstick fresh, her smile deliberate. "You know," she said lightly, "old people don't deserve love. They've had their chance." The sound of the spoon against porcelain stopped. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate. Mark's eyes didn't lift from the paper. Perhaps he hadn't heard, or maybe he chose not to. I felt something inside me tighten, then settle like a door closing. My fingers were steady as I folded my napkin. "Would anyone like more coffee?" I asked. Because it was the only sentence that didn't tremble. Vanessa declined with a smirk. Mark turned a page. I carried the empty pot to the sink and rinsed it out, watching the thin stream of water blur the reflection of my face in the window. Outside, the camellias I'd planted last spring were in bloom quiet, bright things thriving in their own corner. I envied them their peace. When I left the kitchen, the smell of coffee still hung in the air, sharp and bitter, following me down the hallway toward the quiet of my room. The next morning began the same way all my mornings did, by moving carefully through someone else's house. I made the coffee, set out 3 cups, and waited for the sound of footsteps upstairs. It wasn't my home anymore. Not really. It was a place where I tried to stay useful enough to be tolerated. Mark left early for work, briefcase in hand, eyes tired and distant. "Thanks, Mom," he said, brushing my shoulder on his way out. His words always sounded kind, but they never stayed long enough to fill the space they left behind. Vanessa appeared soon after, heels clicking across the tile. She glanced at the pancakes I'd made. "You don't have to cook every day," she said, her tone light but cutting. "People don't eat like that anymore." I smiled faintly, wiping the counter. "Old habits," I murmured. She didn't reply. The house grew quieter after she left. I folded laundry in the living room, careful to stack their clothes in neat piles, and dusted the piano that no one played. Every sound I made felt too loud. Sometimes I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. Someone smaller, careful, fading around the edges. In the afternoons, when the light softened, I slipped out to the garden. Lily would join me after her classes, dropping her backpack by the porch. She asked about books, about her grandfather, about the flowers. Her voice was a comfort I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. We'd sit side by side, trimming dead leaves and talking quietly. Those were the only moments when the air felt warm again, when I remembered what it felt like to be seen. That evening, the house was full of faint sounds, the hum of the dishwasher, the creak of the old floorboards, the low murmur of Vanessa's voice drifting from the living room. I hadn't meant to listen. I was walking down the hall with a folded blanket in my arms when her laughter caught me. "She still talks about love," Vanessa said into the phone, her tone light and cruel. "Isn't that sad at her age? It's like she's forgotten how ridiculous that sounds." The words hung in the air, sharp and effortless. I froze, the blanket slipping from my hands to the floor. For a moment, I stood there, heart hammering, waiting for her to stop talking, waiting for some hint of kindness that never came. When I finally moved, It was only to retreat to my room and close the door quietly. As if the sound might betray the weight I carried inside, I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers pressed against my knees to keep them from shaking. My reflection in the window looked blurred. The lines of my face softened by tears I hadn't meant to cry. A soft knock broke the silence. Lily stepped in, her eyes widening as she saw me. "Grandma," she whispered, sitting beside me. "Don't listen to her. You deserve love more than anyone I know." Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to reach the part of me that still believed her. I took her hand and held it, letting her warmth speak the truth that words could not. 2 mornings later, I stepped out to collect the mail. The air still heavy with the scent of rain from the night before. The porch was damp, sunlight pooling in small puddles across the wood. Among the bills and catalogs was a cream-colored envelope with my name written in careful cursive, Mrs. Eleanor Price. The handwriting was unfamiliar. My first thought was that it must be a mistake, some remnant from another life. Still, I brought it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter while I wiped my hands. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried something waiting to be believed. When I finally opened it, I found a letter from the Charleston Community Alliance, the organization I had volunteered with years ago, before Mark and Vanessa's house became my quiet corner of the world. They wrote to tell me I was being honored at their upcoming event for my decades of literacy work, and that the Post and Courier would feature a short article about my service. For a long moment, I just stood there, the words blurring in my vision. I had forgotten those afternoons at the library, teaching adults to read, helping them sign their names for the first time. I hadn't thought anyone remembered. The kitchen clock ticked softly, steady against the rush of my pulse. I pressed the letter to my chest, the paper warm from my hands, and felt something long asleep inside me stir again. I kept the letter tucked inside the drawer of my nightstand for 2 days. Each time I passed by, I felt its presence like a small pulse beneath the wood. My mind replayed the same warnings I'd heard my whole life. Don't make a fuss. Don't draw attention. Be grateful. Stay quiet. Those words had kept me safe once. Or so I thought. Now they only felt like walls. On the 3rd evening, I took the letter out again. The paper had softened at the folds from how often I'd opened it, read it, and closed it again. I traced the printed words with my finger, imagining the faces of the people I used to help those afternoons filled with laughter, patience, and second chances. The sound of the front door opening pulled me back. Lily's voice echoed softly down the hall. A moment later, she appeared in my doorway, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. "You've been holding something back," she said, half smiling. I hesitated, then handed her the letter. She read it once, eyes widening, and looked up at me with a brightness that made my chest ache. "Grandma, this is wonderful. You have to go. Let them see you." Her confidence was contagious in the gentlest way. She saw me not as someone fragile or finished, but as someone still becoming. I folded the letter carefully, smoothing out the creases. "Maybe," I said quietly, feeling my throat tighten. "Maybe it's time." Lily leaned forward and hugged me, and for the first time in a long while, the silence around us didn't feel heavy. It felt like possibility. The morning of the ceremony arrived with the hush of spring rain still clinging to Charleston streets. Lily insisted on driving me, even though I could have taken the bus. She chose a navy blue dress from my closet, one I hadn't worn since Mark's wedding. "It brings out your eyes," she said, fastening a small silver pin to my collar. Her excitement steadied me more than any mirror could. The community hall stood on Meeting Street, surrounded by magnolias just starting to bloom. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of old wood and flowers. rows of chairs filled with familiar faces from years gone by, teachers, volunteers, neighbors I'd once visited to deliver books. My heart trembled at the sight of them, people who had built their lives quietly, like I had. When my name was called Eleanor Price, I rose, hands unsteady, knees stiff from nerves. The applause felt soft but genuine. I walked to the stage, feeling the light of 100 eyes that, for once, didn't see me as a shadow in someone else's home. The microphone stood slightly too tall. I adjusted it, my voice barely above a whisper at first. "I never expected to stand here," I said, pausing as the words found their rhythm. Most of what I've done was small, helping neighbors read their mail, teaching children to spell their names, visiting those who had no one left. But I've learned something through the years. I looked out across the hall, meeting faces that glowed with attention. Love doesn't fade with age. It deepens. We may slow down, but our hearts never forget how to care. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that feels like listening. Then came applause, gentle at first, then rising, filling the room like a tide. A woman with a camera approached as I stepped down, introducing herself as a reporter from the Post and Courier. "We'd love to feature your story," she said, smiling as the flash went off. I blinked against the sudden brightness, but found myself smiling, too. Lily hugged me tightly near the doorway. "I told you," she whispered, her eyes bright. I looked around the hall, the polished floor, the crowd dispersing, the faint echo of my name still carried in the air, and for the first time in years, I felt visible, not pitied, not tolerated, but truly seen. My voice, it seemed, had never been lost. It had only been waiting for the right room to carry it. The morning after the ceremony, the house felt unusually still. I was the first to wake, as always, moving through the familiar motions, setting out cups, boiling water, slicing fruit for a breakfast no one ever really thanked me for. But something in the air had changed. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was expectant, waiting. The newspaper arrived with a soft thud on the porch. I saw the headline before I even bent to pick it up: "Local widow honored for lifelong service." Beneath it, a photograph of me smiling, holding the framed certificate, Lily's hand on my shoulder. For a long moment, I simply looked at it. Not out of disbelief, but awe. The world had seen me, and it had listened. By the time Mark came downstairs, the paper lay folded neatly beside his coffee cup. He greeted me absently, rubbing at his eyes as he sat down. Vanessa followed, phone in hand, her robe tied carelessly, eyes half on her screen. The smell of toast filled the kitchen. Mark flipped through the pages, as he always did, until his fingers stilled, his brow furrowed. "Mom," he began, his voice uncertain. He turned the paper around slowly. My face smiled back at both of them from the front page. Vanessa froze. Color drained from her face as she leaned closer. "That's you," she said, the words small and unsteady. "Yes," I replied, pouring tea into my cup. "The community center held an event yesterday." I set the pot down carefully, the sound of porcelain gentle but sure. Mark cleared his throat. "I didn't know you were still involved with them," he said quietly. "I never stopped," I answered. "I just didn't talk about it." Vanessa blinked at the headline again, her lips parting, then closing as if every excuse she'd ever prepared had slipped away. I could see the reflection of my photograph in the silver of her phone screen. For once, she had nothing to say. Lily came bounding in, hair still damp from her morning shower. "Grandma, it's on the front page," she said, eyes bright. She kissed my cheek before sitting down beside me, a grin spreading across her face. Mark looked between us. shame flickering across his expression. "Mom, I'm proud of you," he said softly. Vanessa stayed silent, the newspaper trembling slightly in her hand. I watched her for a moment, then lifted my teacup, feeling its warmth steady my fingers. "You once said old people don't deserve love," I told her, my voice calm, not cruel. "I think you were wrong." The room went quiet again. But this silence was different. Clear, clean, stripped of pretense. Mark's eyes lowered. Lily reached for my hand under the table. For the first time in that house, respect sat at the table with us. Quiet, but undeniable. I took another sip of tea, letting the taste settle on my tongue. The bitterness had gone. All that remained was the warmth. Over the next few days, the house changed in small but unmistakable ways. A vase of yellow roses appeared on the counter, a gift from the neighbors who had read the article. Cards arrived in the mail, handwritten notes from people I hadn't seen in years, thanking me for what I'd done for the community. I placed them on the mantel, their colors soft against the pale morning light. For once, the walls felt like they were breathing again. Mark came home early one evening. I was folding laundry in the living room when he stopped at the doorway, watching me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Guilt, mixed with something gentler. "Mom," he said quietly, "I should have stood up for you a long time ago." I looked up from the stack of towels, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "You see things when you're ready to," I said. He nodded, eyes lowered, and left a small box of my favorite tea on the table before going upstairs. The gesture was simple, but it said enough. Vanessa spoke little after that morning. Her laughter, once sharp, had dulled into something careful. She avoided my eyes but no longer filled the air with small cruelties. When she passed me a dish at dinner, our fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. I didn't either. Lily kept the newspaper clipping folded neatly in her notebook. She showed me messages from her friends, all calling me the coolest grandma in Charleston. We laughed until tears came. In the quiet that followed, I noticed something I hadn't felt in years: peace. It didn't arrive with fireworks or apologies shouted across rooms. It came softly, like sunlight filtering through the shutters, touching everything that once felt cold. The air was lighter. I moved through the house without shrinking, and when I breathed, it felt like the world finally allowed me space to exist in it fully. I started writing again in a small blue notebook Lily had given me for Christmas 2 years earlier. Its pages had stayed blank until now, waiting for a reason to be filled. Each morning, after breakfast, I sat by the kitchen window with a cup of tea and wrote down fragments of my life, how I met Mark's father at the library, the smell of magnolia trees the summer we married, the day Lily was born. The words came slowly at first, but soon they began to flow, gentle and sure, like water finding its way home. Lily often joined me at the table, her homework spread out beside my stories. She'd glance at my handwriting and smile. "I want to read them someday," she said. "You will," I told her, "but only after I've written enough to make you laugh and cry." By late spring, I had returned to the literacy center. Walking through its glass doors felt like stepping back into sunlight after a long winter. The volunteers greeted me with warmth, and one of the new learners, a woman my age, hugged me after class. "You make it seem possible," she whispered. I understood what she meant. At home, the house no longer felt heavy. The kitchen, once filled with tension, now carried the sound of laughter mine, mingling with Lily's. Sometimes even Mark joined in, drawn by something lighter than obligation. I realized that peace isn't found in being left alone. It's in being part of life again. My hands, once shaking from hurt, now moved with purpose, turning pages, watering plants, shaping the small world I'd reclaimed. And in the soft hum of those quiet afternoons, I felt not like a guest in someone else's home, but the keeper of my own. Months passed, and Charleston eased into summer. The air grew heavy with salt and jasmine, and every evening, the sky burned gold over the rooftops. One Saturday, an invitation arrived from the community center, the same hall where I'd once stood, trembling behind a microphone. They were unveiling a small gallery honoring local volunteers. And my name, they said, was among them. When I told Lily, her eyes lit up. "We're all going," she declared before I could object. And so, that morning, the four of us drove together, the same family that had once shared a house but not a piece. Mark drove in silence, the windows down. Vanessa sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the passing streets. I sat in the back with Lily, her hand warm in mine. Inside the hall, laughter echoed softly. On the wall near the entrance hung a row of framed newspaper articles. There it was, my face, my story, preserved behind glass. Eleanor Price. A Life of Literacy and Love. The headlines seemed both distant and deeply familiar. Mark stood beside me, reading the article from start to finish. "They got it right," he murmured. His voice was low, almost reverent. Vanessa didn't speak, but I saw her reflection in the frame. Eyes lowered, expressions softer than I'd ever seen. Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Look, Grandma," she whispered, "you're part of their history now." I smiled, not out of pride, but out of something quieter and understanding that history isn't made of grand gestures. It's built from the moments when you choose to keep giving, even when no one's watching. As we left, sunlight streamed through the glass doors. Spilling across the floor, I paused for a breath, feeling it warm against my skin. For the first time in many years, I felt entirely whole, rooted not in someone else's home or opinion, but in the simple, enduring truth of my own life.